What is up, grinders? Welcome to a UFC Fight Night. Jandiroba versus Lemos. This is another card. I'm just going to call it UFC Ugly 2 because it's 2 weeks in a row. But last week it was really difficult to navigate. This week's just as more with 11 fights. We were up to 12. I'm like, of course we have to lose a fight. That was a weird one. I mean, scroll, the guy got on the scale. Medical issue after. Come on, man. We want 12. We want 13. We want 14 fights.
Yeah, actually, I don't know what happened there because he seemed absolutely fine on the scales. He was smiling, kind of hopping around, shaking hands with everybody, and then suddenly it was like, oh, he's not medically cleared. Like, sometimes they have to drag them off the scales, and I forget the guy. About a couple months back, that they literally dragging him down the hallway and he couldn't walk. And it's like, oh, that's not a surprise that he didn't get medically cleared after weigh-ins. This one is kind of surprised, so I hope everything's okay. But yeah, down to 11 fights and not the highest level card. Like we said, we're kind of talking before the show that it's like cut down season, so this happens in late July, August. It seems like, but still scores the same for our purposes. So 11 fights, and it's an interesting card. It's pretty unique in that the lines are very, very close. Like no fighter is an outsized favorite. Nobody's like a huge underdog. I think the biggest underdog is probably Diane Barbosa now. Not even the cheapest fighter, but she still has better than 30% chance of winning the fight outright. So yeah, should be an interesting card.
It's a scary world when Luana Carolina has the little bit of money line value. I mean, we're talking minuscule, but it's like that. These are the cards that we're dealt with, right? Like, nobody wants to go to that fight. Then you talk about the main event, which you talk about all the time. Range of outcomes. I don't know if there's a wider range of outcomes for this main event. That's our starting point with just 11 fights. Jandiroba really just not like a patented ground and pound vicious. Like, she doesn't have that violent button. I've been talking about it lately. Women's MMA, I want the violent girls. Like, we'll talk about Miranda Maverick, who can actually get a little bit violent in there. And of course, Barbosa will have some first round equity, but Jandiroba would be more comfortable keeping that position, John, than she is going for the finish. So I'm a little worried about that aspect of things. And then you look at this slate, it's like, okay, I can get Lemos in, who probably has a striking advantage, has 5 rounds to work with, over 3.5 rounds juiced a little bit last time I looked. An obvious play in Lemos as well, because she could outclass her. Maybe the grappling negates itself, but I see this not scoring. I see this thing scoring a ton for a finisher early, and then I just don't know where those other outcomes come into play.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be a little bit overowned, particularly on the Jandiroba side. I think she's averaged 27 significant strikes in all her UFC fights. I think her maximum was against Mackenzie Dern in a loss, was 63 significant strikes landed. Like, she's just not she's not adding points through striking generally. Now she does get the 5 rounds to play with, but I think it's still about under 49.5 significant strikes. She is under 2.5 takedowns. Like, that's not a great for 5 rounds. Yeah, like, I think what's going to happen on this card, I think, is that people are going to have salary, and when they have the salary, they're going to go, well, I can fit in Jandiroba. She's the main event favorite, but she might not score that well, and she's not that big of a favorite. So I think we're showing her with almost 49% ownership. I think it's way too high. I think she's only got a 53% chance of winning the fight, and there is a significant chance she wins the fight, and it's in 3.5 rounds, and it's just not that high score.
She can win the fight and have less significant strikes, which is a rare outcome in UFC nowadays.
Yeah, and she's like, I think she, her path to victory is probably a submission. Her 2 UFC wins that were not decisions were both submissions. But she's probably not going to get a knockout unless something bizarre happens.
They're virtually identical. Oops, sorry, cut out. They're virtually identical inside the distance lines at like plus 165, plus 175. So like the books know that the highly outcome is one of them, takes over late. Maybe one of them gets like a early submission, meaning Jandiroba side, or Lemos catches her late with a knockout, once she's tired from grappling.
Yeah. But even like an inside the distance win for Jandiroba, if it comes in the 4th round, it's maybe not that good because it's not as high scoring as like an inside the distance, right? Like inside the distance for a 3-round fighter, I mean, there's a pretty good chance that it's ending in this, 1st or 2nd round. Inside the distance for Jandiroba might mean a 4th round finish, a 3rd round finish. That's not that just like, a 5th round finish where she didn't add a bunch of points in the 4th round. So yeah, I don't know. I'm going to be under the field on Jandiroba, and I'll probably be. I think our ownership on Lemos is surprisingly low. I think we've got her at like 32%.
Yep, 32.
Higher, just because I mean she's about a coin flip. I think it's about a 45% chance she wins the fight, and she's got about a 15% chance of getting the 1st round win. Like I have more confidence in her putting up a high scoring win than Jandiroba.
Think about the salary as well, right? Like it's so valuable, the smaller slate. You see these dogs end up coming a little bit higher owned in the main event because you have those 5 rounds to work with, especially in the women's MMA. Now, I might as well just talk about the girl, the man that's right next to Jandiroba at the same ownership. Steve Garcia. This is the world we're in of MMA. Steve Garcia is going to be nearing 50% in lower field, 45 to 50. And his path to victory is 1st round knockout. Like it's quite narrow. The problem is he's just off of that upper echelon of fighter at 86. So like I could see like maybe a barn burner in the 1st round leads to a 2nd round, knockout. And you almost hope you get a little bit more than a minute or 2 in that 2nd round for Steve. And I talk about leverage. Choi has immense amount of leverage on this slate, dude. And Steve has been hurt in so many fights. It pained me to tag Steve. You'll see on Lineup HQ if you have it, guys, that I tagged him, and I'm like, I have to though. The metrics -110. He's a tremendous inside the distance line. It's just all of that equity is built into a finish.
Yeah, exactly. I losing one of the fights makes me like Steve Garcia a bit more because. My thought process was he's going to go over owned because his real path to putting up a big score is only a 1st round win. The fight props on this, yeah. I think Tavares Park is the only fight canceled so far. Hopefully, the only one canceled in the whole card. But I think Steve Garcia. The fight props have him over under like 25 significant strikes, which is pretty low. It's even lower for Choi. I think it's about 20. This is going to be a fight where there's a really good chance it doesn't go to the 3rd round. Pretty good chance it doesn't go to the 2nd. If it does go to decision, these guys are going to score low. And the loser of the fight is probably going to put up near 0. But the winner, depending on when that win happens, could put up a tremendous score. So I like, I was going to say, I think Steve Garcia is going to go over owned because he's the only fighter with a really good inside the distance line, but now he lost a fight, so that gives him a bigger path to like getting there, like a 2nd round win.
Yep.
I still wouldn't roster him like near 50%, but I think 40 is right. Maybe 35 to 40% is a good good chance. There's a possibility he gets a 1st round win and gets knocked off the winning lineup somehow, but most likely you want to roster him at about his 1st round win odds.
Yeah, I mean it's ugly. It's so ugly that the highest owned guy now becomes even more valuable. I feel like Gibson wasn't this high owned early in the week. It's same thing, 47, 50%. You got like 3 fighters that are almost instant clicks in people's lineups, and it's a little bit scary because Cody Gibson's fighting a guy who had neck surgery in Brian Kelleher. Boom Kelleher. A boom or bust play, literally, pun intended. He will go out there and he's scoring points or he's getting scored on. I obviously couldn't tag Kelleher. I have to tag the side that says, hey, you've got money line equity here. You've got the inside the distance line, obviously, on Gibson is tremendous. It's easy to get up to the 9,300, like you mentioned earlier. If you want to go to a Lemos, it allows you that salary. Start picking off middle range. You can get 1 or 2 of these upper echelon fighters. I just think that there's another range of outcomes where it's a volume-based striking. There could be some ugly grappling, and I absolutely could see Cody Gibson shooting in for a sloppy takedown of some sort and Kelleher grabbing that guillotine that he's done many times before.
Yeah, so and Kelleher Kelleher has really good win odds for his price. Like he's only 6,900, and that's the cheapest fighter on the card, but it's the cheapest fighter on a card where everybody's got pretty good win odds. Like you don't usually that $6,900 fighter is like somebody that's got like a 20% chance of winning the fight, right? They're plus 400, plus 500. Kelleher's got a decent chance of winning the fight. I mean, he's only got about 34% chance of winning the fight. So yeah, it's tough. I think Gibson's going to go.
Can't advise people to play a guy who had neck surgery. It's like, but at the same time, look at the competition. Cody Gibson has one win in the UFC, and that's barely at that. They say like it wasn't that big of a win. It was a weird stoppage, and they brought him back after working his ass off on Tough. And he gets back in there, and you can see what the UFC is trying to do, right? All right, here's a guy who just had neck surgery. One of these guys kind of got to go. But it could be so sloppy that this is a must play, I think.
I think it's possible Gibson goes overowned just because he is the most expensive fighter on a card where people are going to have salary to play with. So I think a lot of people are going to be putting in some of these underdogs, right? You put in a Thomas Peterson, a Kurt Hollabaugh, maybe you go with Lemos, and then suddenly you've got like 9,500 left. And you're like, oh, this is great. I can put in like Cody Gibson. I can put in the most expensive fighter and still have a couple $100 left. I think he is going to hit like 45, 50% ownership, and that's just not warranted. Like his odds to win, like the flip side of Kelleher having decent win odds for his price is that Gibson doesn't have that great win odds, for his price. So I mean, like nothing against the guy. I just think that he's probably going to win, but he's not like a super high scorer when he wins. So I think there's a chance he goes overowned, and I'll probably be under the field.
Yeah, it is tricky, and I think you make a lot of sense when you want to feed a 50%. It comes down to the ownership game, but isn't there a Mr. Burns hands? I didn't get to see the cast yesterday morning, but there had to be a Mr. Burns hands right below Gibson.
Oh, for Miranda Maverick?
There has to be. It fits Blundered's mold, right? Yeah. Takedowns, ability to chip in all scoring, low owned, women's MMA.
He was enthusiastic about Maverick, if I recall, but there was no specific Mr. Burns hands. But I do agree. Like I think Miranda Maverick's a good play. Like I think she's my favorite fighter in the 9,000 plus range, which also used to include Park. But so now it's just 3 fighters. But I do like of the 3, like of Lee, Gibson, and Maverick. I do probably like Maverick the best because I think she's going to go lower owned, but she is a high scorer. If she fights at a pretty good pace, she can get takedowns. She'll add the ground and pound. She can get a finish, but like her odds for a finish aren't as high as Gibson or Lee. So I think people are going to skip over her. But she could have a pretty good score in a decision. So yeah, I kind of like Miranda Maverick out of the 3 fighters over 9,000.
I think I honestly had to say, which fighter you didn't want to go to, and it had to be this one because, and I'll really tell you, is Barbosa comes out hot, dude. Like if you remember, she was on pace to break the slate in half last time out against Karakite. She had a few minutes of control time, little pitter patter, which we love. Like she was able to control that first round, and then it fell off a cliff. Like there was nothing to be had after that first round. I'm looking now; it was a takedown. 2.5 minutes of control time. So I really do worry about Maverick's ceiling if she's controlled in the first. Like I'm not saying a goose egg in the first, but say, it's at least competitive for a minute or two and then Barbosa gets her offense going. There might be a world where Maverick's ceiling is a little less than people think. The problem is, right? We know this. We've been playing long enough. If you gas yourself out and you're a dead body in front of somebody, you can give up a ton of points. Like the whole fight, it's a good fight because of that matchup style if Barbosa gasses out, but I worry about Maverick's ceiling a little bit. And I still think she's a great play. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, there's nobody with a great ceiling though. I agree. I think the concern is warranted. If there's a concern with everybody, I'd probably aim for the lower owned, fighter, just because. Yeah, I agree. We kind of don't know what's going to happen. Like her competition in this price range is Cody Gibson and Jung Lee. I do like Bill Algeo maybe a little bit better and at a little bit of a cheaper price.
I was going to get to that one.
Yeah, nobody's got like that high of a ceiling except for like Steve Garcia and maybe someone Wu Choi, but that ceiling comes with a scary low floor.
Yeah. We might as well shift to the mid range a little bit here. We have a question in chat for DK GPP. Ogden versus Maverick. Leave more money on the table with Ogden or not with Maverick? What are you thinking, John?
I'd probably go with Maverick, just because like Ogden's not going to be tremendously low owned. So like if you can go up to Maverick, I would do it. She's got a better chance to win. And like Trey Ogden's still like a slight underdog, 48% chance to win the fight. I think Maverick, the line's been moving in her favor a little bit. She's about a 67% chance.
The other thing too is when you talk about that dynamic I just mentioned, I would have more faith in Maverick getting some points against Barbosa in the first than I would have with Rajabov. Rajabov's a guy who has historic, right? 11 takedowns. We rarely see the double-digit takedown. I guess we might as well just pivot there. Weird fight for the context of the slate, because I could see either guy in a dominant win scoring very well. Problem is when it's competitive, I don't know what this thing scores like. 8,400 Rajabov is just enough where it's like, maybe he slows down the deeper the fight goes. Ogden stops the takedowns. This thing could get ugly.
Yeah, I agree. I think Razumov is he's plus 100 for over 1.5 takedowns, which I think is a pretty good number considering he got 11 in a fight once. There'll probably be some points scored. This is another fight that doesn't necessarily need to end early to put up a good score, but they could like negate each other, right? So like every other fight in the card, it could go in any direction. But I think it's, relative to the rest of the fights on the card, I think it's a good one to target just because we should see some takedowns. And then like we've seen, right? Like once they're on the mat, they could be rolling around, right? And then you're just adding reversals and sweeps and, all these things. So, then there's control time. And they're not super shy with the pitter patter either. Like they're not really high volume, but they're high volume enough where they're not they're higher volume than Jandiroba, I'd say on the.
I think the perfect segue here is Trey Ogden fought Hollabaugh, right? And Hollabaugh had a ton of strikes from his back. I feel like he was on his back the entire fight. And somehow he did the, little bongos from the bottom, and he put up points off his back too. So just to back you up, there is a lot of points to be had in that fight. They're going to go for these crazy things, even if they're on the mat. And Kurt Hollabaugh, I don't know. You didn't tag him. You didn't have faith like I did. I mean, I'm just saying Kurt Hollabaugh plus 215 inside the distance. That's wild to me. I don't look at him as a finished guy, but when you're Kruhaski, right, got knocked out in the first round, of course there's going to be bias towards that. But Brenner would destroy Hollabaugh. So I feel like anywhere this fight goes, Kanan probably has an advantage. I like him that he's off of the ownership from Garcia, from Jandiroba. I like that there's somewhat of an unknown. What does this fight look like if it does go outside of the first and it goes to a second or third round finish? The problem for me is what do you think? Hollabaugh could stall the thing out, I feel like, for scoring.
I think it'll be one of the higher scoring fights. Like it's a fight that I do want to target. I think Kanan Kruszewski is going to maybe go a little bit overlooked because he had put up such a dud in his debut against Elvis Brenner. But I agree, right? Like Brenner would potentially do the same thing to Hollabaugh. So Hollabaugh's inside the distance, I think, has been coming down throughout the week, getting better odds throughout the week of an early finish. Just because Kruszewski just doesn't have the chin from the UFC. But if he does, he could be high scoring. So I think it's a good fight to target because on either side. And Hollabaugh was right there. Both Hollabaugh and Du Choi were guys I was considering for the takedown. I think they're very live underdogs, and they could be high scoring underdogs. So nothing against Hollabaugh. I think if I was going to tag more guys, he would have been one of the guys I tagged. But I like this fight to target just because I do think it could be high scoring. Again, it's one of those fights. It's got a reasonable path for an early finish, and even if it doesn't have the early finish, it could be high scoring in a decision.
If there's going to be a fighter that comes out and looks like a minus 1,000 on this slate, I think it's Kanan, and I just think it's because Hollabog had those knee sleeves on. He could be pretty shot, dude. Like, I feel like there's a world where even if Kanan gets like a 30-27, it looks like 100+ points.
Yeah, we saw that. We just saw that with Zach Reese, right? Like Zach
Yes.
Reese was heavily favored in the UFC debut because he was a Dana White Contender Series guy that had done really well in the Contender Series, and he came out against was it Cody Brundage, and he got slammed and knocked out in the first round. And then I think Reese's next fight, I think, was about a toss up, where he wasn't a heavy favorite, and then he went out there and looked tremendous. And I think you could see the same thing with Krzyzewski, right? Where, looked great on the Contender Series, looked really high scoring for fantasy purposes, comes into his debut, gets leveled in the first round by a good UFC fighter, better than Cody Brundage. And maybe in his second fight, we could see a performance where like, oh yeah, like he's good like we thought. He just didn't do well in his UFC debut, which happens all the time.
Yeah, I like these spots. I wish the price was a little bit better, but for fantasy purposes, that's how we can kind of exploit that type of situation. And you talked about a guy above there. I might as well go to your boy Bill Algeo in the choice, right? People are going to get the choice confused on this slate. I guarantee you, people are going to think that Duho Choi is going to be Sungwoo Choi, and they all obviously are about the same ownership on this slate. I think X Factor wise, this guy's in the Hall of Fame. Duho Choi is legitimately in the Hall of Fame for a banger of a fight. There's knockdown upside. There's unknowns on his side of things. But tool for tool, Bill Algeo has a lot more. And I understand the tag, right? Like, you know what you're going to get out of Bill Algeo. I think the X factor scares me from Duho Choi's side of things, right? Like, if he hurts Bill, you can see what the UFC is doing, right, John? Like, all right, Bill, you just got knocked out. Here's our guy who has wars in the UFC in the Hall of Fame. Here's our guy to get him back on track.
Yeah, we'll see. This should be a good fight. I think Algeo has the highest prop for like significant strikes, and I think it could be high scoring on either side, right?
Mm-hmm.
Algeo could get like knocked out early. So yeah, it's another fight that has a good path for scoring, whether it goes to the decision or if there's an early finish. I kind of lean towards the Algeo side. Yes, I think he'll be a little bit higher scoring than Choi. But yeah, I mean, I think you could do a Choi stack if you want. I think it's totally in play. But I like Algeo as just a historical scorer. We don't exactly know where Duho Choi is necessarily at. He's only had one fight, I think, after a pretty big layoff. So that's a little bit of a concern in that I think that fight was like a draw against Kyle Nelson. But yeah, I think this one, fight, all these fights could go either way, but I do like this one for being a little bit higher scoring.
Do you remember when he was the prospect everybody wanted, and we're like, okay, a loss. He can get back there. A loss. Oh, he can get back there to the promised land. We're like, what's going on, Korean Superboy? You're our guy, right?
Yeah, I think that was a while ago. I think that was
it was a long time
pre-COVID.
The other thing too built in there, just to back it up, Duho Choi's nearly 5 significant strikes per minute. Algeo 6. You rarely see that type of output for the sheer amount of fights that these guys have had in the UFC too. So like, I feel like even a striking battle should be okay for you in your lineups for either guy, to be fair. Do we pivot down to that ugly women's MMA? Finally, I think we do. We want a Carolina minus 115, Pudilova, minus 105. It's a win equity fight, right? If we have to talk about this, you have to smash that like button. That's what the producer Steve is saying, right? It's so ugly that I'm thinking to myself blindly, Pudilova has a little bit of striking, and then I'm thinking to myself, I can't get burned by Luana again. She actually chips into all scoring criteria too. Like, I'm starting to look at somebody that can get, reverses, actually get top position, get a little bit of the pitter patter. She does that. Pudilova seems to be somewhat dependent on physicality, and God, I never thought I'd say this. Luana might be more physical than Lucy.
Yeah. So on another card, I might like this fight a little bit better, sitting in the mid range. Like if we were kind of scrapping for every dollar of salary, trying to get up to, the $9,500 fighter that's got a 2/3 chance of getting the first round win. I would be saying, oh, you can like sneak in either of these ladies into your lineup and just hope that it's higher scoring. A card where we don't necessarily need the salary, like both of these women have like a pretty good track record of not being that high scoring. I'd maybe lean towards the Carolina side if I'm trying to go, for somebody that's going to be higher scoring, but it's kind of a toss up. I think we're showing this fight with about the lowest combined ownership of any fight, and I think that's kind of deserved. It's like I don't mind because it's both low paced and likely to go the distance. So you're kind of getting the worst of both worlds. If you end up with 8,000 or 8,200, I think it's fine. Put either of these women into your lineup, but just because that's the only amount of salary you have left. But I don't really like this fight for fantasy purposes.
Yeah, I mean, the smaller slate, that win equity goes up, but when you have guys like the Choi stack, the Hollabahs, the Petersons, that changes things around a little bit. Now, I'm going to talk about a fight that I was interested in your thoughts on this. One of the better inside the distance lines, like he's definitely a firm top 4 or 5 on this slate and only getting 20% ownership. Muhammad Usman has firmly been a plus 125 inside the distance. The money line has been coming towards Peterson for that grappling. I think we saw in the regional that he's got grappling in his back pocket. And Peterson's ownership hasn't gone up since the fight got canceled. The biggest fight that I think you should be looking at is this one after the fight got canceled. How come the ownership's not going here? Are they scared of such sloppy heavyweights just not doing anything? Because I'm hung up that the odds haven't shifted on the inside the distance for Usman. Somebody's seeing something.
He hasn't shown to be like a potent finisher. He's got 3 UFC wins. 2 of them have been decisions, and the decisions were pretty low scoring, like both under 82 points. He did have like a knockout, but even that, second round knockout was like 85 DraftKings points. He just doesn't have that monster score in his game log. It would make everybody want to go there. And then the kind of icing on the cake for why his ownership, I think, is going to be low is the fight's basically a coin flip, and Usman's 8,800. So if it's a 50-50 shot of who's going to win, you've got one fighter at 8,800 and the other's at 7,400. Like I'll take the 7,400. I do think Usman is going to see low ownership, and I think we've got him at about 20%. It wouldn't shock me if it's even lower than that, because I think everybody's going to see that same calculation, right? Like, it's a coin flip flight. I want the $7,400 guy. I can put more stuff into my lineups. I'll probably have Usman, I don't know, maybe right around that 20% or maybe even lower, just because, he's low paced.
But do you think Peterson pushes the pace? Because if Peterson pushes the pace, the scoring goes up. Like with the grappling, he shoots in a sloppy takedown. He gets a couple elbows. It does seem like the wrong person was favored. This is one of those situations where that contender series guy comes in, loses his first fight. Peterson's got more growth too, honestly. Usman's closer to a finished product somehow.
Yeah, I haven't heard the person that really likes Usman in this fight. And there is maybe a perception that maybe it's his name that's even keeping him as a slight favorite. But he just doesn't do anything that scores really, really well, except potentially get an early finish. But his odds for that just aren't that good.
Yep. We have plenty of time before lock here, so make sure you guys check out RotoGrinders Premium. Go get ahead of the competition with RotoGrinders Premium. We've got an option for whatever level you're looking for. Get yourself a 6-month combo subscription at an exclusive price of $469.99. That's a savings of $250 instead of buying all 6 individual combo premiums. If you're not a fan of that commitment, you can absolutely get a month of RotoGrinders Premium for $120. Those that want a test run before getting into the waters here at RotoGrinders, you can get a 3-day pass for $19.99. Check the link in the description below for more information. I mean, there's this fight I left the last one because I love flyweight fights. Flyweight fights mean hopefully constant action. It's one of my favorites. And then we're pretty much going to get out of here. Bruno Silva versus Cody Durden. Is this as simple as a striker versus grappler? Because, I mean, it seems like when Durden can get on for the grappling, he can get 110 plus points. And then Silva, holy smokes, this guy's turned it around. He's got knockouts 1, 2, 3. For his knockout rate starting to go up. Funny other tidbit. Last week we talked about Montel Jackson, right? There was somebody else earlier on the slate I'll think of in a second that it was like Montel Jackson's window is pretty small. It's that first round, and then he goes out and bang, first punch basically knocks him out. These things happen, but I'm starting to think about it like if your knockdown rate is consistently there, John, that inside the distance rate just has to keep going up. Like it seems like it's not catching up because he was like +2 something, 200, 250 inside the distance and gets the job done in 60 seconds.
Yeah. So Bruno Silva.
Yeah. Silva's knockout rate is big. What has Durden been knocked out before against, Durden's grappling? It seems like a striker versus grappler, which is a recipe for fantasy goodness.
Yeah. And so I agree. Like I kind of like both sides. I like Silva a little bit more. He is now a little bit of the favorite. I mean, it's about -120, but he's lower priced than Durden. So you get a little bit of savings there. And yeah, Silva, either of these fighters could put up a big score. I kind of like Silva putting up a big score in an early finish, like inside the distance, and it doesn't necessarily have to be first round. Because you get 70 points for a second round win. If that's coming with a knockdown, then that's 80. And at Silva's price, I think he's 7,900. Then that's like a pretty decent score. I think Durden could get some takedowns, and again, like priced in the mid range. If he's getting like 3 takedowns and he's getting the win and the control time, then that's a pretty good score for like 8,300 or whatever his price tag is. So yeah, I like this fight for fantasy purposes. And it's one like I'd much rather target this like the 8,300, 7,900 fight, Durden Silva rather than Pudilova or Carolina.
Yeah, no, it's one that I love because you just know that weight class, they're going to go for it consistently. When we just talked about the heavyweight one, where it's like there could be spurts of just inactivity that won't be good for scoring purposes. But last thing, I think there's a lot of talk for the Twitter sphere, and the ownership didn't follow this fighter, Haider Emil. I feel like this guy has a lot of love, and the number has somewhat stayed the same. His ownership has definitely stayed the same, and nobody. I don't know why his ownership is 40%. Do you think people are actually going to play Lee on this slate? And would it be just because of the metrics behind, the scene of inside the distance, or because it seems like this is a guy who has scored nothing. What has he scored? 73 and 50 points. I figured that his ownership would be like way down. Game loggers would go, what am I doing?
Yeah, I don't think his ownership will really get to 40%. And I know I won't like roster him at 40%. There is a chance he gets an early finish. So that's a possibility. He's not like nothing in the grappling. So he could get a takedown and maybe even gets a finish there. I think he's worth considering, but I'm not going to go out of my way to play him. It's kind of a toss up. Would I rather play him or Cody Gibson? Lee's a little bit cheaper. Haider Emil like put up a monster score in his first UFC win. Like on the Contender Series, he was not scoring that well. So I think he went to like decision and would have had a pretty low score in over 3 rounds. So I think that's a little bit of a mirage. I think there's a chance I'll be under our projected ownership on both of these guys, just because I don't love Emil for the scoring or for his possibility of getting a win. And I think Lee, I don't think Lee should be like 40% owned. I mean, I think his best path is like a first round win, and which is maybe 25% ownership.
Yeah, he could get like really, slow paced kickboxing is definitely in play. Haider Emil may go for a takedown early while they're dry, which would stall out the scoring. So I agree. And I feel like Lee is got to be pretty young. So, there's more growth there where Emil came in pretty late in his career. So final takeaway, do you think this isn't your slate? You love these lower owned, like the Emil, Barbosa, Kelleher. You love going to these low priced that allow you to build different types of lineups. Tell me how to get different on this slate.
I think it might be a good slate to leave some salary on the table, just because like the underdogs are so good. Like you can put together a combination of underdogs, like put together like 4, or maybe some of them aren't even underdogs, right? Like, but you can put together like 4 fighters under 8,000 and get like still have a pretty good chance of all 4 winning their fight. So decent card to leave some salary on the table. I think like roster Steve Garcia. I think Garcia is like the big question mark on this card. So like roster him at about his chances of getting a first round win or a little bit more, but like don't go berserk. Like don't.
Are you going leverage or are you going fade and hope Steve wins a crazy decision? Close.
I think we've got like a little bit low ownership on Sungwoo Choi. I think we've got him at 23%. I think it should be a little bit higher because he doesn't necessarily need the first round win or even like the second round win to get to land on the winning lineup if he wins the fight. So I'd go over the field on Sungwoo Choi, or at least over our projected ownership. But I think a fade is in play as well, right? Like if you let's just say these guys just don't get the early finish, then like they're not going to be really high volume. So they might just be standing around for a while, and then which is great. Just no violence to anybody. I love rooting for that on a UFC fight. Like just don't hurt each other. So yeah, I think a fade is in play as well.
You mean like an Usman under 71.5 points on pick 6, which would be something you guys would know about with the DK pick 6 Firefox extension. In case you missed it, RG subscribers can now use the RG DK pick 6 browser extension on Firefox to have our premium props and pick'em projections overlaid on your screen quickly and easy to find the lines with the best value and make the expert picks all in one place. Download it on Firefox today. Next week, the quality goes up. Finally, we have 2 5-round fights, John. We got Edwards and Bilal. Bilal gets his shot. That's for fantasy purposes, that one could be ugly. Aspinall versus Blades, though, running it back from the injury. That's a good one. And then a bunch of good fights up and down the slate that, we have 14 fights. Let's keep it that way. Right, John?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't realize there was 2 5-round fights, but there's a pretty good chance that one of them won't go 5 rounds. So
I know that I needed to bring a smile to your face, right? Like Steve, before the cast came in, said, I used to be a UFC fan. I don't know a name on this slate. I bet you he probably would have known Leon Edwards and probably would know Tom Aspinall, but we appreciate Steve for producing the show today. Thank you, Squirrel. We will see you guys next week. For myself, H3 Buddha. Make sure you check out all the stuff on RotoGrinders before lock. Thank you for tuning in.